My name is Rhea.
And my name is Serena Roberts.
The death penalty has been part of American history since 1790. It has been heavily debated for many different ethical, psychological, and economical reasons. Is the death penalty justified, or is it creating more harm than good in the process?
This map is a representation of the death penalty across the United States of America. The red stars represent the states that have the death penalty, which is about 25 states. The blue stars represent the states that have it abolished, which is 21 states. And the purple stars represent the states that have the death penalty technically, but the governor of those states does not allow it to be implemented. And those are four. There are four of those.
A psychological lens. Something people fail to consider are the other participants in the death penalty. Being an executioner is not a career, it's a task. There is a figurative and literal curtain shielding the process, as observers are kept behind a curtain and executioners' identities are kept a secret. They are subjected to emotional attachments and may form connections with the inmate. People on death row have committed heinous, astonishing crimes, and it is one thing for the public to view them as monsters because they do not witness their humanity. Ron McAndrews, a former Florida prison warden, recalls prisoners trying to comfort the executioner, saying things like, "Don't worry, it's okay, and I can handle it." The conflicting emotions between sympathy and duty negatively influence the warden's psyche. 31% of state executioners develop PTSD, which is significant because it is 11% higher than among Iraq war veterans. Unfortunately, botched executions are a realistic fear among executioners, the most common form being lethal injection. In 2011, the US-based manufacturer of sodium thiopental ceased to produce the drug. Since then, the death penalty states have been experimenting with new and untested drugs. The psychological damage results from the uncertainty and stress of the procedure. Witnessing a gruesome death such as Clayton Lockett scars the executioner for life. This is what happened with Clayton Lockett. At 5:27, a paramedic gave Lockett an IV to inject the drug midazolam, which is a sedative. She was nervous because she had never before performed the experiment with the untested drug. After 3 failed attempts at injecting the IV, she asked the doctor to step in, and they poked him like a pincushion until they eventually found a vein. At 6:36, an observer saw Lockett move. He kicked his right leg, began to breathe heavily, clenched his teeth, and tried to speak. His lawyer began to cry. At 6:56, there was a call to stop the execution, but it was too late. At 7:06, Clayton Lockett was pronounced dead of a heart attack after being in agony for 43 minutes. The family's stance on the death penalty varies, but they understand that nothing can bring back their loved one, and the process causes pain and suffering to others that could be avoided. The families of death row also suffer huge emotional loss. They have to endure their loved one's offense and the pain of losing them. Just because someone is a bad person doesn't mean you necessarily stop loving them.
One cannot talk about the death penalty without bringing up the ethical dilemma surrounding it. An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. The death penalty isn't justice, it's the justification of more murder. A renowned historian, Howard Zinn, said that capital punishment cannot be justified in any society calling itself civilized. This brings us to the 8th Amendment. All cases of the death penalty use are a clear violation of our 8th Amendment right, especially cases like Clayton Lockett's, which was a botched execution. The death penalty is cruel and unusual, and based on our US Constitution, it needs to be abolished.
80% of all capital cases involve white victims, despite them only accounting for 50% of the murders. In April 2001, a study by North Carolina concluded that you were 3.5 more likely to be convicted if you were black rather than white.
One thing that cannot be disputed as far as the death penalty is the numbers. A common misconception regarding the capital punishment is that it would cost more money to imprison someone for life than it would to execute them. This is false, as it costs about $1.26 million for a death penalty case, whereas it only costs $740,000 to imprison someone for life. So what are the reasons for that? One reason is the legal costs. 90% of all death rowers cannot afford their own private attorney. This means that the state appoints a public defender. Death row public defenders get paid about $12,000 more than a non-capital punishment case. Another reason is trial length. Death penalty cases last about 16 years. A non-death penalty case would only last about 6 months. The reason for this is they get appealed several times as a life is on the line, and there's no limit to the number of appeals that the death penalty case can have. Finally, we have incarceration costs. Death penalty inmates are kept in maximum security prisons. They are kept in these cells for 23 hours out of the 24-hour day, meaning they get more amenities such as mini fridges and televisions. On top of this, maximum security facilities require more guards, and these guards are paid more money than a normal guard. One example of someone being in prison for a long time is Gary Alvord. He was on death row for 40 years because he appealed his case so many times. It was the longest time someone was ever on death row.
Is the death penalty justified? The death penalty is not justified because it does not ensure justice. It causes psychological damage to those involved that could have been avoided. Having executioners is wrong, considering it violates human nature to deliberately kill someone in such a degrading state. After all, punishing murder with murder is a mind-boggling paradox that haunts death row's capital punishment enforcers.
On top of not being worth the mental toll it takes on the executioners, it's just not worth the monetary value. At costing about $1.26 million, death row just isn't worth it.
This country was founded on the principle that all men are created equal. The death penalty does not uphold this principle and it is unethical because it cannot ensure equal punishment. A disproportionate amount of people of color are convicted as a result of this underlying prejudice. The death penalty should be abolished at a federal level so the states cannot participate.
An alternative is life in prison without parole. This has been successful in over half of the world's countries. Some limitations to this are villainous people will continue to live. For this reason, a lot of people might not be willing to get on board, such as the families of the victim, who might not want their loved one's offender to continue to live. Another limitation is prisoners escaping, but as you can see from this chart, that number has steadily been decreasing each year to the point where it's next to none.